The events that happened to me 16 years ago still haunts me to this day. As a child, it was really hard to get a proper sleeping schedule because of a memory that was ingrained in my head. I was 10 years old, and I was in 6th grade at the time. And I had a really close friend at that time. His name was Daniel. And I had known Daniel since I was maybe 4 or 5. We were great family friends as well. Our families would always go out to eat together, have parties together, and just the good old childhood friend. Well, just like any other holiday, our families would get together at Daniel's house and we would throw a potluck. It was almost routine. My mom would be driving our family's Highlander SUV with my dad in the passenger seat with my sister and I in the back, carrying the food to bring over to the potluck. We'd get to Daniel's family's house and we'd enter through the garage. There was nothing wrong with the front door. We were just so familiar and accustomed with the family that they always had us enter through the garage. If we were to look at the house from an aerial view with cardinal directions, the wide garage doors were located on the southern section of the house. The family would let us park inside their garage to shelter our cars from Ohio weather. I always had to be careful. Their garage flooring was concrete, shiny, and professionally polished for that matter, almost to the point you could slip if it got damp. However, it was always satisfying to slide across the garage and hear the gliding sensation against your shoes. Garages always reminded me of construction stores like Home Depot. Maybe it was the residue of sawdust or mechanical hardware. Beyond the garage was simply an entryway into the home's first floor hallway, greeted by bolt-fastened 4x8 blocks of wood. The hallway's lighting was rather dim, as other areas of the house were usually lightened up. The kitchen was adjacent to the area, which made it common to know if the smell of hot food was ready by just standing in the hallway. I would take off my shoes and leave them by the hallway door, and then walk a couple steps on slated stone tiles and proceeded to the basement. The basement stairs were more fun than the garage. You could walk down rather fast and comfortably because of the soft carpeting on every landing. Once you got to the bottom of the basement staircase, to your left was a storage room. Now, I'm not the one to poke around, but this door was always shut closed. I guess the darkness and mystery of that secluded room in the basement gave me an uneasy feeling. The basement was always where Daniel and I hung out. It had a TV for entertainment, and against the staircase wall was a desk and a computer where we would often play video games on. My sister would be playing with Samantha, Daniel's younger sister, and Daniel and I would probably be playing League of Legends or Warcraft and StarCraft 2 on the computer. And upstairs on the ground floor, Daniel's parents would be talking to my parents and other guests. Despite the bustling activity that was going on, Daniel decided to take a break to get more food upstairs. As I heard the last of his footsteps reach the top of the basement, I realized I was the only one left. Well, I continued to stay around to play more video games. I think I was playing a character named Udyr on League of Legends. A couple moments pass by and I hear a creak, almost as if a door was slowly opening. And I had noticed that the storage room door was slightly opened. I felt a strong presence of fear overcome me, a feeling that almost made me want to cry. My immediate thought was that there was a ghost in the house, but being 10 years old, I thought people wouldn't believe me if I had mentioned it, thinking it was just a child playing a trick, calling a ghost in the basement. Moreover, I didn't want my sister, Daniel, or Samantha to think that I was scared. I don't know, maybe because I thought that it would make me look weak, or maybe they would make fun of me. Next thing you know, the door gently closes again. At this point, I was petrified. I couldn't move. My eyes were widened, and the hairs of my forearm could feel the slightest breeze from the heating ventilation from up above. I continued my focus on the video game I was playing. In my petrified state, the only part of my body that I could move were my fingers. I was praying for anyone to come downstairs to break the uneasiness. And when I looked at the clock, what felt like a half hour was only 5 minutes. I kept convincing myself that it was the heating ventilation that caused air pressure for the door to move on its own. But I knew in the back of my mind that when I first came down to the basement, that door was shut closed. It was the typical door you see in upper middle class homes. Usually the doors are painted white with an aluminum silver door handle that requires you to push down, almost like a lever. Knowing how the physics should be operated for when it opens only contributed to my growing anxiety. Thankfully, I heard my dad and Daniel's dad make their way downstairs. They were talking about Daniel's dad's CD collection over by the TV, and they were completely unbothered by the storage door. Meanwhile, I'm still sitting there, recovering from the tense situation I went through. Shortly after, Daniel made their way down with some food, and we were just back to normal. I think I was suppressing it from my memory, trying to be in the moment, and just tucking away the emotions. Eventually, I was having so much fun that I had completely forgotten about the door. It was around 9:30 to 10. My mom was getting us all ready to leave, but I wanted to continue playing with my friend Daniel. We were in the middle of a game of Yu-Gi-Oh, and I had wanted to continue our match. I had asked if I could sleep over. My mom and Daniel's mom agreed, and I stayed over. Throughout the night, we ended up on the second floor. I was still in a dissociated state in regards to the door and the basement, but none of that really matters when you're a 10-year-old boy that has Yu-Gi-Oh cards in front of them. Daniel and I continued a couple matches. I think I lost almost every single match, but I didn't have a deck of my own, so I had to borrow one of his, and I realized that he had given me the less superior one. Filled with random junk cards, we were wrapping up the last card match in his room, and I had realized the time was 2 a.m. It was late, and we had to go to bed. That night we only had one bed, so I took up one side, and Daniel slept with his head on the other end of the bed. For perspective, at a bird's eye view, the room was square-shaped. For the location of the bed, the head of the bed was touching the southern wall of the room, pushed up against the eastern wall. I was sleeping on the west side of the bed, and my head was against the southern wall of the room. Daniel was on the eastern side of the bed and slept parallel to me, with his foot touching the south side of the bed, so I could see his feet at this moment, is what I'm getting at. The entrance to Daniel's bedroom was in the northwest section of the western wall. The lights went out, and we both tried to go to sleep. The feeling of dread and anxiety came back again. I had noticed that there was a crack in the doorway of the bedroom. I tried to not pay much attention to it by covering my line of sight with the blanket. As time passed, I still couldn't fall asleep. I had noticed that the digital clock by the bedstand said somewhere around 3 o'clock in the middle of the night. Daniel was practically out. I could hear his heavy breathing. The only source of light in the room was the moonlight piercing through the shades of the window, and the little bit of light blue that came out of the digital clock. Now, I'm not the one to sleep with doors wide opened, or cracks for that matter. Even closet doors in my own bedroom I still close to this day. But in that moment, falling asleep was next to impossible with the anxiety I was having. I knew I had to muster the courage to uncover the blankets to confirm that nothing was there at the door crack of the room. So I did what I thought was best. As my face was still covered by the blanket, I angled my fingers slowly to uncover a small hole for my eyes to see through the blanket. And that was a big mistake. At the doorway was a set of red eyes staring back at me. I couldn't make anything out of the figure. I just assumed that its head level was by the door handle. The eyes were extremely bright red. I started thinking that maybe it was a nightlight out in the hallway, or maybe it was a fire alarm. But fire alarms back then weren't ever placed at a door handle's level. They were usually on the ceiling, but the fear was so real that I was trying to rationalize everything that I was seeing. I was so scared that I couldn't even close the peeping gap of the blanket. I had just averted my eyes elsewhere, avoiding, praying that whatever that was looking at me didn't know that I was awake and aware of its presence. I was in a paralyzed state of panic. My peripheral vision noticed that the eyes had disappeared and moved away. I laid there sleepless throughout the entire night. Eventually, it was almost 5 a.m., and you could hear the birds chirping. I think out of exhaustion, my body put me to sleep to get whatever rest that I could. Afterwards, all I can remember was waking up and having breakfast with Daniel, but I had nothing to say. My mom picked me up a couple hours later, and I went about my childhood life, always making sure every door and closet was closed properly. Needless to say, that would be the last time I would ever sleep over at that house. Around 8 to 9 years later, we're around 19 to 20, so we were sophomores at different universities. It was around summer. All the college students were on break, and I had gotten news that Daniel's family was selling their house. Most of the house was already vacant by this point because they were getting ready to put it up on the market. There were maybe a couple of boxes here and there. Daniel had sent a text message to me and a couple of other close friends to come over to pick up any free things that they otherwise would have thrown away. I pulled up to the house and I saw them all sifting through things in the garage. It was just me and Joshua who showed up. Joshua was another close friend of ours. The only other people were Daniel and Samantha. Their parents were out busy securing their place in Seattle. Through all the moving of boxes and leftover things, we eventually made it to the basement and into the storage room. At this stage, I was older and more resilient, being 19 at the time, and with the storage room's lights on, and as well as being next to my two close friends in the same room, it was a lot easier, should I say. There wasn't any sense of dread, but I sure wasn't going to be left alone in this room either. We did what we could and got all the boxes upstairs so they could all be ready to be moved out. We were taking a short water break on the ground floor, hanging around the kitchen area. That's when I noticed I heard pacing and footsteps upstairs, and I figured that it was Daniel's sister, Samantha, still moving some things around. But when I turned the corner, I saw Samantha on the same floor as me. I quickly took a quick head count of all four of us. 1, 2, 3, 4. Me, Joshua, Daniel, and Samantha on the first floor. But I swore I heard footsteps on the second floor. I didn't want to cause a panic, nor did I want to be made fun of in the moment, but I waited till we were all outside. The burning question of a ghost in Daniel's house. I had finally asked and confronted him. I remember. We were on the driveway when I asked. He's usually a very joyful and funny person to be around, so I was expecting a laugh or a chuckle out of his mouth as I asked that question. He looked at me with a pause. It was a long and uncomforting pause, but, like I knew, he would finally break the silence with a small chuckle. He sounded very uncomfortable, almost like as if I was confirming his own suspicions of the house. I didn't want to pry, so I decided to give him my own testimony of the night when I slept over when I was 10 years old. And I had followed up with the footsteps I heard on the second floor just moments ago. pacing back and forth when everyone else was on the main first floor. Thankfully, everything was already moved out, and what Daniel knew about the house, I never got an answer. But I think it's best to keep this in the past. We don't want that negative energy following us, but I know what I heard that day. When a house is so vacant, you can hear every little creak and crack that happens throughout the whole house, almost as if it echoes. I knew I heard pacing upstairs. And to whoever's living in that house now, I hope you're doing okay.